Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Brian Fariso, Director of the Portland Art Museum. Thank you for being here for the introductory talk for Gods and Heroes, Masterpieces from the École des Beaux-Arts, Paris. As many of you know, the Portland Art Museum has had a very special relationship with the art of France. Throughout our institution's 123-year history, French art has been a cornerstone of our collections and exhibitions. With major works in the collection by Courbet, Delacroix, Pissarro, Gauguin, Monet, Cézanne, Renoir, Degas, and Rodin, among many, many others, and groundbreaking exhibitions, including the 2003 Paris to Portland Impressionistic and Post-Impressionistic Works from Portland Collections, to the 2009 exhibition, La Volupté de Goût, French Painting in the Age of Madame de Pompadour, and last year's groundbreaking exhibition, The Art of the Louvre's Tuileries Gardens. This museum has served as our community's venue to learn from some of the world's most important artists. Gods and Heroes furthers this aim by focusing on one of the most influential art schools, taking us on a journey through art history and its most significant moments. I want to thank in particular the American Federation of the Arts. Founded in 1909, the AFA is dedicated to enriching the public's experience and understanding of the visual arts through organizing major exhibitions throughout the world. We are extremely, and I am personally extremely grateful to AFA Director Pauline Willis, who could not be here. However, we're pleased to also welcome Curator Michelle Hargrave, who will be speaking today from the AFA and the organizing curator of this exhibition. I would like to say special thanks to our sponsors, and in particular, the presenting sponsor of this major show, our gifts in memory of Richard Geary and the Geary Foundation. Lead sponsors include Laura S. Meyer, Nanny S. Warren, the Swigert Foundation, and major sponsors include the Walter C. Hill Foundation and Travers Hill Pollock. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the museum's Janet and Richard Curator of European Art, Dawson Carr. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Reverberations from the École des Beaux-Arts can be felt throughout the European and American paintings collections here at the Portland Art Museum, and you will find in the coming days subsidiary labels identifying those students from the École in our collections. The ones for the American collection are already up, and by Tuesday morning we'll have the many, many more labels up for the European collection. How many of you have seen the exhibition already? All right, well, those of you who have not have a real treat in store, and those of you who have been already, I think you have already seen that this is going to be a marvelous exhibition to revisit over the course of the summer. It has a lot to teach, not just about a school teaching arts to students, but about a school determining how we look at things, how art communicates. It is my great pleasure to introduce first this afternoon Michelle Hargrave, who is Curator of Exhibitions at the American Federation of the Arts. This is one of the most venerable arts exhibition organizers in the world, and certainly the most venerable in this country, and Michelle's going to tell you a little bit about it. Michelle did her undergraduate work at the art history powerhouse at the University of Michigan, and then went on for graduate studies at Bard College in New York. This is the premier place to study the decorative arts in this country. And she has been responsible for an incredibly wide range of topics at the American Federation of the Arts, which she's about to tell you. Will you please join me in welcoming Michelle Hargrave?
Good afternoon. As Dawson mentioned, my name is Michelle Hargrave, and I'm a curator at the American Federation of Arts. And I'm so excited to be with you here today to celebrate the opening of Gods and Heroes, Masterpieces from the École des Beaux-Arts, Paris, which is organized by the American Federation of Arts, or AFA, and the École des Beaux-Arts. As you may have heard, and for those of you who've seen the exhibition you're aware of, the exhibition showcases some 140 masterpieces from the École, the original school of fine arts in Paris, and a repository for works from some of the most renowned artists since the 15th century. The idea for this exhibition began way back in June 2007 when Emmanuel Schwartz, a research curator and guest at the École and guest curator of the exhibition, suggested that the AFA and the École work together on a traveling exhibition that would show for the first time in the United States in more than 40 years the history of the École des Beaux-Arts and its significant impact on Western arts visual culture. The AFA was the perfect partner for this project, as we are, as Dawson mentioned, we're the leaders in traveling art exhibitions. In fact, we were founded in 1909 by an act of Congress specifically for this purpose. Oops. The idea was, back then, was to bring art from the big institutions in the East, like the Metropolitan, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the MFA Boston, to what was then called the hinterlands, although we don't use that term anymore. But we still do work to bring works to areas in the country that just don't have access to such masterpieces. And we've become more global over time, and we work to link U.S. and international museums through touring exhibitions and facilitate broad access to original works of art from all time periods and cultures. So way back when this exhibition was being bandied about, we were in the process of working on a couple exhibitions with other Parisian institutions. Specifically the Louvre and the Musée des Arts Décoratifs. So a pairing between the École and the AFA made absolute sense. And we were so excited to work with the École on Gods and Heroes, and we brought it to our board, which includes museum directors from all over the country, including Portland Art Museum's own Brian Fariso. Oops, I keep pushing. I guess I have an active thumb. And they agreed with us that this was a wonderful opportunity to tell the development and teaching of a fine arts academy that really fostered some of Western art's most magnificent achievements. An institution that was in a city that was really the center of the art world for hundreds of years and was the creme de la creme of its day. Pretty much any French artist that you can think of from the 17th century to the 19th century, and for a brief time period, American artists as well, either studied at the École or worked with a professor in his private studio, or was rejected by the École, as in the case of Manet or Cézanne. Which is surprising, I know. And these artists we've come to think of as masters weren't born that way. They were shaped, they were molded, they went through the École's rigorous training. They followed the specific rules of art. And these rules that the École had in place created a uniform style that focused on the idealized human figure and had a legible narrative. And that really formed the foundations for European art, and it's still with us today. So we went to Paris and worked with Emmanuel to select the pieces that would best tell the story of this great institution. And here Emmanuel and I are in the anatomy room, standing in front of Houdon's Écorché, or Flayed Man, which I imagine that Dawson and Emmanuel will tell you about in more detail. And this room is just phenomenal. It's at the top of a staircase, and you feel like you've stepped back in time. You could easily pass David or Eng, on their way to their class, although perhaps not those two because they hated each other, but other artists. And it's just a wonderful time capsule, and the room is literally full of thousands of skeletons and casts, and these are homework assignments from some of the most famous artists over the past few hundred years. I think really that's what excited us a lot about this exhibition. It was the idea of bringing these works out into the spotlight. You know, the École is not open to the public. You can't just walk in and go into the anatomy room. And they don't have their collections on display in galleries like the Portland Art Museum does. So it was a chance to give U.S. audiences access to masterpieces that are typically tucked away in the library, offices, and storerooms. And quite a few of these works on display have never traveled to the United States before, including this portrait at the far end of Louis XIV after Hyacinthe Rigaud. This painting has been hanging in the library since 1870. It was put there to cover up a painting of Napoleon III, who, who at that date was forced to abdicate and had obviously fallen out of favor. And so in putting this tour together, we were able to take the work down, and thanks to the support of the Portland Art Museum and the other museums on the tour, conserve the work, and we're able to reveal the Napoleon III painting for the first time in over 140 years. And I do want to say there are other, let me just show you it at the Albuquerque Museum of Art. There it is in all of its glory. And there are other additional surprises and details like this in the catalog for the exhibition, which is available in the gift shop. And I do want to say that this is really the only publication of its kind that tells the history of the École and really presents a comprehensive look at the collections in the École. So short of kidnapping Emmanuel Schwartz, this is your great opportunity, which I don't advocate, this is your great opportunity to learn about it. So we got the green light from our board, and we spent several years working on the project, conserving, researching, writing museum texts, the catalog, and finding our partner museums. We packed up the works in June 2014 and brought them to the first venue on the tour, which was Oklahoma City Museum of Art. And here you can see one of our registrars inspecting the works. And she's sitting there on the floor doing condition reporting, checking the condition of all of the paintings. And from there, the show went to Albuquerque Museum of Art and History, and then to the Baker Museum, Artist Naples. And I'm showing this slide because when you're putting together an exhibition as complex as this, you really have to be creative, be a problem solver, think outside the box, or the frame, as the case may be. And what happened was Naples had decided to put the exhibition on the 3rd floor, and some of the paintings were just a tiny bit too big to fit in their elevator. And it's not like a suitcase where you can just sort of shove it in and press it down. So these are works that are a couple hundreds of years old and are quite fragile. So what we ended up doing was, with the help of the conservator at the top of the stairwell, we took the canvases out of the frames and had a group of 10 burly men plus our registrar carry the 500-pound frames up the stairwell. But it worked out, which is good. And there was nothing dramatic like that at Portland, where you can see the écorché being installed. And I do, as Portland is the last stop on the tour before these works go back to Paris behind closed doors, I highly encourage you to spend a lot of time with them and really enjoy them. And speaking of the different venues, I do just want to say that each of our partner museums really plays an equal role in the development and success of the tour. And it's really been a pleasure for the AFA to work with the Portland Art Museum on this exhibition. Specifically Brian Fariso, Dawson Carr, Don Urquhart, Charles Campbell, Amanda Cohn, Michael Smith, Matthew Juniper, and other PAM staff. We have a long and fruitful relationship with the Portland Art Museum, and we've worked together on previous exhibitions. As mentioned, Brian Fariso has been on our board and has also been on our exhibitions committee since 2009. And he and our director, Pauline Willis, have really encouraged a close relationship between the two organizations. And we've certainly talked with them and consulted them about projects that we're considering, and their advice has absolutely been invaluable. And we look forward to future museum partnerships. And finally, I also want to acknowledge Emmanuel Schwartz, research curator at the École, who's been an absolute pleasure to work with. Emmanuel has the whole history of the École up in his head, and I certainly encourage you to seek him out and ask him questions today on the panel. And I encourage you to spend a great deal of time in the exhibition. This is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and let me pay tribute in return to the AFA, and particularly its chief registrar, Jennifer Hefner, who you saw riding the forklift up, hugging Oudon's écorché. And I'm going to boast a little bit as well, because you have to understand that the Portland Art Museum has a real commitment to European art. And this is not true everywhere. Everywhere else that this exhibition was installed, it was installed in a little more than half the space that we have devoted to it. So those of you who've already seen the show understand full well what that means, and it's about the commitment of this institution to doing justice to the art of Europe at a time when modern and contemporary is of much greater interest to most folk. On that note, I'm very pleased to welcome to the podium this afternoon's very distinguished guest, Emmanuel Schwartz, the conservateur en chef du patrimoine at the École des Beaux-Arts. Emmanuel has been at the École since 1995, and we've deviated a bit, as you can already tell from our planned conversation this afternoon, and Emmanuel is now going to speak to you on my request about a topic dear to him. He's one of the great experts on Homer and representations of Homer's poetry in French culture and particularly in French art. Those of you who've seen the exhibition know that the Iliad looms large within it. And so it gives me very great pleasure to welcome my distinguished colleague, Emmanuel Schwartz.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to speak about French art so far from France. It is a perilous honor to produce my broken English in Portland, Oregon. But it is altogether fitting and proper to thank all those who dedicated themselves to the exhibition opening today. May I express my special gratitude to Dawson Carr, the staff and trustees of the Portland Museum, and to Michelle Hargrave and to the American Federation of Art. Thanks to all of you, the École des Beaux-Arts and its inspiration shed a new bright light in the Far West. Okay. Tragedies were but crumbs from the great banquet of Homer. The poet Aeschylus' word is well known. So much for tragedies, but what about comedies? Let me just remind you of the tragic comedy of Hephaestus, deceived by Aphrodite and Ares, as Homer scans it through and Cornelis masses after him in this print. Apprised of his misfortune, Hephaestus prepares a trap above the conjugal bed that closes on the amorous pair, halting there at the gates. Seized with savage rage, he hurled a terrible cry, imploring all the gods, Father Zeus, look here, the rest of you happy gods will live forever. Here is the sight to make you laugh, revolt you too. Just look at the two lovers scrawled inside my bed, locked in each other's arms, to make you laugh or revolt you. Comedy or tragedy. The whole Olympus rushes to the force, overjoyed by the sight of the trapped lovers. Thus was invented the comic epos, better named burlesque, by the rhetoricians. Here they are all standing in front of the adulterous bed, Hermes, Apollo, and Poseidon, no doubt no doubt are the gods amused at finding their fellow gods entangled in such a crassly human situation. More than that, each of them would gladly take Ares' place under the net if he could but spend one night with Aphrodite. Oh, Apollo, Hermes says, if only, how I'd love to bet that golden Aphrodite. Husband, wife, and lover, the three of them are inventing bedroom farce, and the mock heroic gods clasp hands at the cues as on Lucas in Theatre Lodge, as in Daumier's drawing on your right. Greek poetry at the theatrical crossroad between the comic and tragic muses, like English painting. You see Hogarth drawing the comic muse and Reynolds Saracidona's tragic muse. In France, nobody could enlighten us with more accuracy than Diderot, a devotee of theatre and of painting as well. Diderot comments on Hephaestus' misfortune and thinks it anything but funny. It's a long way from this Vulcan to Hermes. Mr. Lagrenet, the author of this painting in the Louvre. Sir, you made him a cuckold, and rightly too, as it fits, but a petty one as it does not, and there you were wrong. He is dull, ugly, and common. Diderot wants a burning, a raging, a tragic cuckold, a Shakespearean cuckold. We picked up first some of the solid, nourishing crumbs of the great banquet of Homer, mechanical processes of guffaw laughter. Horror turns easily into burlesque, alias the painter Deuxis, the Greek painter Deuxis, alias Rembrandt, this painting in Cologne, drew the drawing which causes death by laughing. He had discovered caricature. The most accomplished heroes are blemished with some kind of ridiculous defect. The climax is reached with the so-called Homeric epithets. Achilles suffers from a tendinitis caused by his mother and described by Daumier, see on the right, in the very hill that is named after him, Achilles' tendon. He is called Podas Ocus Achilles, swift-footed. The painters choose their comic targets for artistic ridicule among the tedious speaking. From the Iliad, Phoenix and Nestor, two old men in dotage, embody boredom. Case of Phoenix, the wise advisor on the right of the ambassadors, the old man, of the ambassadors by Ingres sent by Agamemnon to Achilles, would make a psychanalyst delirious. Bereft of his eyes for having made love to his father's mistress, he recovers his sight and becomes tutor to Achilles. An old man in the time of the embassy, he prattles his own story to his former pupil, perhaps to mellow him, more probably to please himself. Story which Achilles obviously knows by heart, having heard it 100 times. And all the time the ambassadors stamp their feet with impatience at the doting old man. The enraged Ajax, last on the right, this one, this is Phoenix and Ajax, rudely concludes, those words will never stop. Phoenix understands at last, see his hand on his head. Homer's private jokes. Ulysses has a narrow escape from Charybdis at this very moment when a judge leaves the court to go to his dinner. Shall we say about tea time? Here is another example. Ulysses threats on his couch as a blood pudding on the grill. Homer is a great-grandfather of English nonsense. Private jokes of this kind occur in pupils' pieces. Helen is sheltered by an anachronistic umbrella, in this case by Fournier, that is good-humored anachronism. I know of other pompous fools. This painting is not on display, but it belongs to the École des Beaux-Arts. The more powerful, the more pompous, the more laughable. Here is Father Zeus, up into the earth. Here is the worst blasphemy in Homer's verses. Zeus has ordered the gods not to interfere in Trojan affairs. Queen Hera wondered, how could she outmaneuver Zeus, the mastermind? At last, one strategy struck her mind as best she would dress in all her glory. Perhaps the old desire would overwhelm the king to lie by her naked body and make immortal love. And she might drift an oblivious, soft, warm sleep across his eyes. And now Zeus behaves like a cad, comparing her wife to a catalogue of his former mistresses, giving them marks for beauty and recording their innumerable progeny. Zeus, overdone by Hera by Jean-Jacques Le Bardier, allowed the artist into the academy, but it allows Zeus neither verity nor dignity. He is clearly worn out after the embrace. Homer uncovers what Zeus truly is: a mocked husband, an indifferent lover, a vulgar common seducer, a character for Beaumarchais, an exhausted Almaviva. The Marriage of Figaro was performed in Paris a year before this painting was exhibited. But one could compare Zeus to Louis XIV and his numerous insolent and dangerous mistresses. The pupils of the Beaux-Arts were given topics of this kind to paint or carve after, set in small-sized drafts. They had to work for a short piece of time in individual boxes, which were called loges. French language uses the same word loge for theater boxes. There they were alone with great deeds they had to depict. These are the other ones. In Homeric epics, a few people, 2 or 3 men, women peacefully talking, stand out above this world of sound and fury. They have no part in the main plot. They act a small play of their own, built out with wit and lyrical poetry. They do not look very different from our pupils. These interludes, later introducing the main parts of French comedy, were highly suitable for easel paintings and sculpture. 2 or 3 good young people facing war turmoil, and there is Helen at the Sea engaged, celebrating in French manner throughout 4 centuries. The students of the École, this one called Jean-Baptiste Marty, sketched a sort of dance in which the old men seek a balcony over the battle raging below the city walls, hoping at the same time that Helen's elegant outline will come between them and the spectacle. A moment of astounding intelligence and poetic story, although it tells no story at all. Helen and the other wittiest heroes of Homer entertain a theatrical conversation based upon a play on others' feelings. Let's follow Nausicaa and Ulysses, Odyssey, Book 10. It is sunset on the left. Yes, it is sunset. And Ulysses walks it is on the right. It is sunset, and Ulysses walks tactfully behind, letting Nausicaa go first into the palace to inform of his coming. In Benouville's landscape, on your right, he and she are to make their separate ways to the town, for they must avoid any gossip. And previously, on your left, the shipwrecked, naked Ulysses shiningly appearing in front of Nausicaa with his bush apparel. The princess is the only one of the girls who is not frightened away. All these exquisite, smiling and intricate scenes are on the verge of tragedy. Goethe has imagined that Nausicaa was the ill-fated victim of Ulysses. And what about Hector's helmet? Shining Hector reached down for his son, but the boy recoiled, cringing against his nurse's full breast, terrified by the flashing bronze, the horsehair crest. And his loving father laughed, his mother laughed as well, and glorious Hector, quickly lifting the helmet from his head, set it down on the ground, and raising his son, he kissed him, tossed him in his arms. The casque which did affright the child stirs up a feeling of sweet, smiling melancholy, for it is happiness only for the time being. The future is threatening. Andromache is well aware of that. With this charming conversation piece, French painters and sculptors drew out a delightful, trivial badinage on conscience, mockery, and sympathy. Here it is exemplified by young Jean-Baptiste Carpeau. European comedies are based upon intercourse between masters and servants. This fascination for social ranks upside down in disguise explains why many Homeric subjects have been selected by French artists. Ulysses is familiar with changes of dress, appearance, and identity. Ulysses' successful devices are not much approved of by teachers of the École. They prefer scenes where the hero is found out by one of his subjects, for instance, a dying dog. Of course, on your right. The dog Argus is more human-like and sharp-sighted than his king. The king masks, the dog unmasks the king. The king masks comedy, the dog dies tragedy. Human dignity, human tragedy is the privilege of the defeated ones. Homer takes one opportunity at least to sum up the true tragedy of the common people. Briseis and her fellow maidservants, slaves, are ordered to mourn Patroclus' dead body, here in a sketch by Cognier. Just listen to Homer. Her voice rang out in tears, and the women wailed in answer, grief for Patroclus, calling forth each woman's private sorrows. Patroclus' death was but a pretext. They actually grieved for their own sorrows. Homer wrote women's lib. The leading ladies, the mistress, the coquette, and the maid in European comedy are leaders to action and misleaders to men at the Merry Wives of Windsor. What about Helen and the Three of the Judgment? The tragic allegory is concealed by the plot of three mischievous, cheating coquettes, here by Cranach. And Helen is a clever, good-hearted woman who feels but scorn for Paris and thinks highly of Hector. This sketch by Barry, as you see. Evidence of Helen's attraction to Hector is skillfully given by Antoine Barry's sketch in 1823. She tells Hector, flatly in good plain Greek, that she likes him much better than his brother Paris. Hector is no fool and denies to be involved. And he loves his wife, after all. A comedy on Hector and Helen in love is still to be born, but Homer gave the hint. Greek poetry is a mine of information for artists and directors to adjust heroes and stage with proper outfits. There is no archaeological significance, but the sarcastic value is fabulous. Let's speak of Achilles' fiddle. He capers nimbly to the lascivious pleasing of a lute, like King Edward in Richard III, and Hang himself who played the violin. He obviously likes music better than fighting. When artists illustrate Homer, they tend to emphasize those little props as Achilles' cetera. These little props are stripped of any official meaning. Achilles and Patroclus are strange heroes. The two lovers prefer music than fight, and finally will go to bed and make love with the young captive on the left in Angra's painting. You see, it's here. One of the most revealing pieces of finery is the veil, a garment for all seasons. Let us at leisure follow Homeric beauties throughout French art. The Trojan and Greek women are loose-veiled, white-armed and fair-haired. In David's painting, mourning Andromache is seen clad in veils, but she shows off her naked arms. Mourning becomes Andromache. In tragedies, thanks to O'Veil, to O'Neill. In tragedies, the veil ages women in loneliness. In comedies, it is part of the coquette outfit. Is Helen cope with the old man, naked or dressed? That is a long debated question in French art. Deuxis, the Greek painter, painted Helen naked. French pupils were right in claiming for a veiled Helen. They drew the figure of a full-dressed woman happily conspicuous through the shining rays of the peeping sun. So in Homeric epics, things seem to have a gift for acting, whereas Men lose the name of action. Achilles remains steady. This Achilles, wounded by Achille, splendid first name, by Achille Gummery, broods over his heels, his arrow, and his fate. The pupils' mothers took after actus gesture. David's pupils were taught the grandeur of a character by François Talma, the most prestigious actor of his time. Talma played the tragedy of Hamlet of Denmark. He was a model for David, for Napoleon, and here for Martin Droling's Achilles. And thus, great characters highlight deep and eternal questions. In David's masterpiece, Andromache morning, schemes of Western tragedy are melt. On the candelabra, Andromache's verses to her departed beloved remind of what happened and foretell what is about to happen. Aner, apoionos neos telet, oleo cadde, me keren leipes en megaroisi, pais deti nepios autos un te komen su tego tedus amoroi. So it's difficult to read, but it is here. In English, oh my husband, cut off from life so young, you leave me a widow, lost in the royal halls, and a boy, only a baby. The son we bore together, you and I, so doomed. The painter engraved the morning speech on bronze in acknowledgement of the poet's superiority to himself, which simply illustrated him, but the tragic eloquence of the reliefs. So the reliefs, you see two reliefs, there and there. You see them. Of the reliefs painted on the deathbed are undiminished by this show of erudition. They depict Hector and Andromache's farewell, with Astyanax winning away from his father's glancing helm, the most smiling scene of the Iliad, and the death of Hector killed under the wall of Troy, where he had smiled and laughed with his wife and son. Thus, along with the subject of the painting and the quotation of Homer, they present all the scenes that Homer dedicated to the most human couple of the Iliad and the entire history of their characters, present, past, future, father, mother, child, comedy, tragedy, death, a trilogy for 3 moments. Those 3 characters, despite their deep mutual attachment, cannot look at one another because each one is alone and aware of the other's suffering and of his own inability to help. David has painted 3 monologues and 3 fates. Second thought. 4 fates, the fourth as the most pessimistic and sarcastic. David's perfection leads to a pupil's tragedy. All the way of teachings in 19th century Paris were drawn from David with his most brilliant pupil Dominique Ingres as the go-between. Even a dead body in David's painting was expressing a hatred of death. He claimed for life. He taught intelligence of life, not fascination of death. This lesson fell tragically astray. How many pupils, looking at David's model, and seeing but a corpse without a soul, carried out post-mortem examinations on dead, dying, or even living heroes, and as in this study of a painting by David, full of sound and fury, the rape of the Sabine women. Fortunately, David's Andromache had a notable revival expression in The Head of Sorrow by François Rude, a David's pupil, which was shouting the very words that David had written on his candelabra. Homer is not a poet for definitive certitudes. Some students kept amiable sketches bringing Homer's scenes and Homeric source and drolleries to life again, modest plaster carvings, figures silhouetted in a landscape need not David's genius. They speak to mankind, not pompously, but with a smile and a tear, and it is enough for learning artists' experiment, for 3 millenaries of poetry and art, and it is too much too long for this evening. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for that. And when you get into the exhibition, you're going to see these images have incredible power. They don't come off as stilted. There's a sincerity and a power, a concentrated power about them. I'm going to start this off, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. But one question that I've been asked repeatedly by visitors already is, how many students were there at any one time at the École?
In the 19th century, there were In the 19th century, they were very numerous, especially architects. Maybe 60% were architects, especially American architects, as you know, William Hunt and Julia Morgan, and so many. And just now, there are only 600, I guess, and they are not always working in the École, I'm afraid to tell that. But it was the same in the 19th century. They were not compelled to work every time. They had altogether a school and a museum. They could enter the museum and draw after the molding cars, the masterpieces you can see now. They were in the École as they were in the Louvre. They were altogether admirers of art and young pupils.
Tell them about Delacroix.
Delacroix. Delacroix used to be a pupil in the École. He was officially received. And maybe he was ambitious. Of course, he was very ambitious, but he was well known even before he was awarded in the École. So he presented some paintings in the Salon, and he wondered whether he will try to be graduate of the Prix de Rome. If he had the Prix de Rome, he would have gone if he had the Prix de Rome, he would have gone to Rome. But in 1824, I guess, we have the Journal of Delacroix for this year. He saw the painting by Debray, completely forgotten now. It was so bad that he decided not to try and have the Prix de Rome. And so he never went to Rome. It's strange because Rome is not so far from Paris.
Yes. And there were many Americans as well who would attend classes, but I think that our audience doesn't understand that it wasn't a kind of modern university granting a degree in the sense.
There are two periods. During the Revolution and the Empire, some Americans came, especially Van der Leen. Van der Leen was there's a curious painting by Van der Leen in Hartford, Connecticut, representing the murder by the Indians, for instance. It's very amusing. But Rembrandt Peale came and met with David. But they were so numerous in those times, and they were in Paris only because they hated England. During the Second Empire, they were very numerous in Paris, very numerous. And in this period, after 1863, the competitions they had to pass, to enter, to be admitted in the school were very long, very complicated. But they were very brilliant. Of course, they were not. They were upper classes, and most of them were able to understand French, and they were educated in the admiration of France. So they were accepted very easily. They had to work. There's a famous caricature of Sargent trying, and his sister wrote, he worked like a dog. And but the most famous was in Julia Morgan. Julia Morgan was admitted, the first woman ever admitted in the École des Beaux-Arts, because women were not admitted before 1997. She was
1897.
97, and it was for women. It was difficult to be admitted, but for an architect woman, it was extraordinary because no architect in France were women. It was quite impossible. So a young American girl could be admitted. And after that, she rebuilt San Francisco after the earthquake.
You all know who Julia Morgan is. She's very well known along the West Coast, one of the great architects along the West Coast. Let's talk about women a little more. Tell us about women and the École.
Well, as you have seen in the exhibition, academy means drawing human nude and masculine, male nude, male. But after all, most of those pupils did prefer women. This can happen too. So the women were not admitted in the school as pupils, but they could be admitted not always in the academy. Some are very famous, l'Abbé Guyard and Vigée Lebrun. They were the portraitists of Marie Antoinette at the end of the 18th century. Of course, anyway, women learned drawing, so they tried to become painters. You can see a painting by a woman in the exhibition, only one, but. If they were not admitted in the school, they could be admitted in the private studio. So generally, the private studios offer masters. Generally, they became the mistress, or sometimes the wife of their masters, of their teachers.
I'm just going to do a plug here. The next lecture in this program is going to be on July the 26th at 2 o'clock in this auditorium by Professor Kathleen Nicholson, Professor Emerita from the University of Oregon, who will be speaking on goddesses and heroines and taking apart and looking very closely at the relationship of women with the Academy and with the École. Emmanuel, who were the models? We see these fabulous bodies that were being drawn in the exhibition. Where did the models come from? How were they found?
Well, the male models and the female models, it's not the same. Until there were, of course, female models even in the 18th century, but only in private studios of the teachers. The male models were official. They were officers. They could have a sword, you know. So they were official, and generally they look beautiful, but they are not, because they were draft as younger as they were. They did not change, but some could last as models during 20, 30 years. So if they look so beautiful, maybe they were not. But the most interesting for me, especially, it is the female model in the 19th century. They were admitted in the school, but not in the competition, not for the competition, as models in the studio. And I think there are photographs with she models in the exhibition. The most famous one was Joséphine Marix. She is exactly in the middle of the painting, the famed crowning, giving the crown to the graduates of the Prix de Rome. You can see the print after this painting. Of course, we could not land this painting because it's a wall painting. But you can see a very brilliant engraving after this painting. And she was a Jew. As a Jew, she was representing classical beauty. It's strange, you know, in France, classical beauty could be, in this time, represented by a Jew. At the end of the century, the Jews were replaced by Italian women. They came from a small village near Rome, and they first were models in the Villa Medici. And then they came to Paris. Most of the models at the end of the century, the she models, the young she models, were Italian. For the men, it could be various.
I'm just going to make this clear for you. Emmanuel is speaking about the large print in the second room, if you will, of the exhibition that shows the great hemicycle in the Amphitheater of Honor at the École by Paul Delaroche. And at the center, you are going to find this Jewish model. I'd like to now turn it over to you. And we have microphones in the aisles, and we'd like to take your questions, and you can address them to any one of us. Here we go.
Could you say a few words about the connection or the differences between l'École des Beaux-Arts and the Academy?
Academy. Well, there are two periods. Until the Great Revolution, it was not the École des Beaux-Arts, it was the school of the Royal Academy. It was inside the Royal Academy, inside the Louvre. Of course, the king was not in the Louvre, he was in Versailles. So the whole Louvre belonged in those times to the artists. They were squatters of the Louvre. So in this time, it was approximately the same. In the academy, you had academicians and you had pupils who were would-be academicians. After the revolution, in France, we made many revolutions. We changed everything, and of course, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more you change, the more it's the same thing. But during the revolution, David, who hated academy for personal reasons and for political reasons, dissolved the academy, and during a few years there were no competitions, no school, nearly no school at all. But of course, it was reborn after a few years, and it was exactly the same. It was a school with competitions, democratic competitions. Anyway, the competitions were democratic even before the revolution. You could be a son of a slave or a son of, it happened, a son of a slave could be awarded the Prix de Rome. So after that, they changed the rules, and the academy was no more inside the school. It was in another palace in Paris, the Palais des Quatre Nations, now called the Palace of the Institute. And the school was moved in its present place, now, where it is now in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. But the teachers were still academicians. So as they were academicians, of course, in a way, it was not so different. It was, officially it was not the same. The school did not depend anymore of the academy, but as the teachers were academicians, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more you change, the more it's the same thing. Until 1968, it was this way.
And what happened in 1968?
1968. January, I don't speak of what happened after 1968 in French art, you know. January, it's a joke. My director does not like the jokes. I say, you call this École des Beaux-Arts, École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts. But, you know, in France now, the beau is, you are suspected when you say beau. The beau does beau exist? Does the beauty exist? Does beauty exist? They are not sure. They don't practice. Anyway, they don't practice. Of course, you can learn painting and sculpture up to now in the École des Beaux-Arts, but you can learn some beautiful things like video performances and what else? No, not happenings. They say performances and. Well, I don't know the name. Well, so you should not call that Beaux-Arts. Remove Beaux-Arts, and you should remove national, because now it is not specially French. It looks like any school throughout the world. So remove national. Superior. Is it so superior? And you know, École, but most of the pupils and some teachers are always away. So remove École. Well, don't repeat that.
I asked Emmanuel the other day when he was going to retire, and he responded instantly that his goal was to be fired.
I am trying to. I will succeed sooner or later.
But you've been trying for such a long time. I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed in this. But Emmanuel has been fighting the good fight, and is there a great deal of interest from the faculty and from the students of the École today in the historic collections?
Long silence. Well, you know, we call that grandes écoles, the grand schools. In France, when you are admitted in a school like École des Beaux-Arts or École Normale Supérieure, the most famous one is École Normale Supérieure, you are completely free. After you are admitted, you can choose. You can be interested in what you want. Of course, for your career, it's different. If you do not follow the fashions, you won't be immediately well known and rich. But if you want to be interested in something out of fashion, like the art, like David and Ingres, you can. So some pupils, certainly not most of them, but probably much more now than 20 years ago, could be interested in history of the school. You know, when you visit the school, my colleague visited the school, it's not only the artworks, all the school is full of history. Even a stone somewhere signifies something. And some pupils are able to understand that. But, you know, in France, it's not a question of teaching art, it's a question of teaching history. Many French pupils are no more interested in history in general. If they cannot understand history, political history, cultural history, how could they understand art history? But I repeat, it's not true for all of them. For me, of course, they are not enough numerous, but some are interested in. And when I come back in Paris, I am supposed to give lectures on the radio, in the school, local radio, about same thing. Maybe I will not tell exactly the same thing, but maybe I will. Maybe I will. You know, I have bought a bottle of Oregon wine. If I drink it in Paris, maybe I will tell exactly the same thing.
Questions? Here we go.
Thank you. In the introduction, it was mentioned that the École des Beaux-Arts changed the way we looked at things and how we communicate. And also it was mentioned that it was rigorous training and there were a number of rules. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how that actually happened.
She means about the vision, the general vision?
About the general vision, indeed. About how the École's methods really determined the way narrative painting evolved.
Well, first, it was a model for Europe. It was a model for different reasons. Some are strictly administrative. As I told you, even in the time of Louis XIV, in the time when they were king, the competitions were highly democratic. They were supposed to distinguish the best one, and generally it was true. It was true. So it's very important to say that it was not only a question of recommendation, of protection, and it was a model admitted throughout the world. Second, the pupils were deeply persuaded that art, beauty, and in a way, liberty, democracy are the same. Of course, they had read Plato. And for instance, the Greek model, it was not only the model of beauty, of strict, of the columns and the orders, it was the model of a democracy. When I visit the States, everywhere in the States, the capital, in a way, it is an homage paid to the French teaching, because it was admitted that Greece was the father, the fondateur, the founder, the grandfather of our democracy. And don't forget that, for instance, Washington, the architect of Washington was Pierre l'Enfant. Pierre l'Enfant used to be a pupil of the École in painting. He became an architect, and in a way he was the teacher of Jefferson. He became an architect in the States. He was a Mason, he was a member of the Cincinnati, and so on. So you see, in a way, the model was not only to copy the nude models, it was also to be convinced that in art there is something more important than beauty, than simple teaching. It is democracy, truth, liberty, and so on.
But I would also say, is it on? Okay, thanks. That it had to do with having a dynamic narrative as well, which is something that the École promoted. In the beginning, as Emmanuel said, it was focused on promoting the king and having this, having all of the figures in the painting in one unified narrative. So all of their expressions, all of their gestures would be focused in this one, important moment in a narrative, and that's something that I think carried on through the centuries. And then eventually, I don't know if we talked about it today, but there was a rebellion in 1863 where the Impressionists, who had been refused admittance to the Salon, they rebelled against these strict rules that the École had for their artists and created their own salon, and that was really that really took off. Impressionism sort of took off from there. So in a way, the École created a foundation and a system that people followed, but they also spawned the Impressionist movement and modern art.
Yes, it's true, but the Impressionists, most of them, of course, as I told you, they were free. So Renoir was admitted in the school, but he went away, and Seurat the same way. So if you did not try to imitate the teachers, of course, but they were officially admitted in the school. In France, the schools are not supposed to make propaganda. Of course, sometimes they did. As Michelle said, it was propaganda at the beginning for Louis XIV. But this propaganda, it was interpreted by the artists. So I always tell, for instance, most of the paintings, the history paintings in the time of Louis XIV represented Alexander, represented Hercules, and of course Hercules or Alexander were supposed to be Louis XIV. But even Louis XIV, who was not very erudite, he understood that the morals of Alexander, who was not so fond of women, Alexander looked more like Le Grand Condé, the most famous general in France, Condé. He looked much more like Condé than like Louis XIV. And Hercules is stubborn. He's completely stupid. So after a few years, generally, this painting of propaganda fell down, and then the gods were, as I shown you, ridiculous and so on. So in France, it's a question of insolence. In Paris, you are supposed to be insolent. Of course, you will find terrible fops and flatterers, but the great artists were actually insolent, like Voltaire, David, and so on.
You have to remember that the French classical style, from the moment of its real inception in the 17th century, was aimed at one thing above all others, and that was simply good storytelling. How best to convey a narrative with moral purpose, something to teach us. And the development of that style, in fact, it's more classical Then Italian style, it becomes even more classical, is the thing that had the greatest impact on the way that we read this kind of narrative painting. Next question. We go down front here.
There was a real, what's the word, paucity of clothing on the men in the pictures that I've seen. Was this an interpretation, or is that the way people did not dress back in the day that it was supposed to represent?
He's talking about the lack of clothing, the nudity, and did this reflect anything cultural? It's really more about the heroic human body. And you've got to remember that the view of the École was very simple. Man was made in God's image and therefore was the perfect vehicle for conveying emotion. And that's essentially it.
So people did not dress that way back in the Roman Greek?
No, this is, it might vaguely reflect this, but this is certainly an idea of the ideas of their time about what things looked like in days of old. There were some clues in ancient art, but a good deal of it has to do with the style of that moment as well. Interpretation, indeed.
And the chance to show off the idealized figure.
Indeed. Ken.
What would have been some of the competing schools with the École, and do they exist at all now?
The other schools.
The other schools.
The other schools, yeah. Well, first, the school, even in the 18th century, was so important that many schools were founded in France, in the country, just with the same rules as in Paris. But of course, the best pupils wanted to go to Paris and to try and pass the Prix de Rome. So this is strange because when they came from Marseille, they had to go north and then to go south and so on. But many acted this way. And at the end of the 18th century, for political reasons, the pupils were so insolent that something like the Ministry of Art, it was the Surintendant des Bâtiments, something like a Minister of Art, decided to create another school for the graduates of the Prix de Rome. It was called the École, the School of the Protected Pupils, of des élèves protégés. They had to become docile. Of course, it did not work at all. But because of the specialty of the school, history, painting, there were, at the end of the 18th century, another school was created in Paris. It was called, I don't remember the name in the 18th century, it doesn't matter. We called that la petite école, the smaller école, of course, the École des Beaux-Arts being the greater école. And it became, in the 19th century, the École of Decorative Art. So the question was this one, the fight between history painting and decorative art. And just up to now, you can say there are two schools in Paris. Now I should say that the School of Decorative Art is more classical than ours for other reasons. I tried to explain a moment ago, but they still exist. Of course, there are many other schools, generally township schools, very classical, and as in the States, very academic. If you want to draw, to learn drawing in France now, you have to go rather to the township schools. Of course, they are much less prestigious. They are not international. But if you want to, it's stupid, but if you want to learn drawing, you can still learn drawing. It's more difficult in the school.
Can you talk a little bit about the École's influence on the schools in the U.S.?
In the U.S.? In the U.S., many, I don't know exactly which names, but many pupils coming from France founded schools in the U.S. In those times, and especially in architecture. Most of the the students, the American students, came to France with the Paris Prize, you know, up to the First World War. And after that, after the First World War, because many French teachers did teach in the States, they were less numerous to come in France. And there are always reasons. Anyway, you know, I always, in France, nobody reads that, but I suppose it's very famous in the States, this novel by Ayn Rand, Fountainhead, which explains how French art became, in fact, fell out of fashion, fell down after the Second World War. But I think that most of the private or the township academies in the States still use the plaster casts, the drawing after the antique and so on. But maybe you could answer your own question much.
I think you did a good job, but yes, their curriculum was based on the École's curriculum. So, and then you see with all of the public buildings in the United States from the 19th century are also in the Beaux-Arts style, and that's, I think, a combination of the architects who studied at the École and then also the architects who studied at these schools that were the offshoot of the École in the U.S.
I'll just make a plug. You can find it on our website or in Portal Magazine, but one of the things that the Education Department is doing this summer is there will be 2 days, I think, 2 days, in which we're going to offer walking tours of Beaux-Arts Portland. They will take in the U.S. Bank Building, the U.S. Customs House, and the like. So look out for those of you who are interested in architecture. We have time for a couple more questions. Yes.
Yeah, so what is the age at which pupils can be admitted to the École des Beaux-Arts? How long is the period of training? How many years? Is it like 3-4 years or optional? And what is the criteria for admitting people, young people? Obviously, they're very talented in some kind of way, but are they judged by their sophisticated ideas on democracy? You were just mentioning that drawing is not such a big deal, you know, to be able to be exceptionally good at drawing. So how do you select these people? It must be very difficult to get in.
So she asked.
And this maybe is a question in 2 parts, which is one, days of old, in the past. At what age did students enter the École?
They could be admitted at 15, and they could stay in the École up to 30. This is a reason of the reform of 1863. In 1863, of course, it was too late, because if they were pupils until 30, and if they had the pre-drum at 30, they were pupils until 35. And at 35, Raphael, Alexander, and Jesus Christ were all dead, you know. So, so it was ridiculous. And in those times, they didn't live so long. So there was in France, we tried a reform. They tried a reform, of course. It was cancelled because it is France. But well, this is the first point. And some were admitted very young. Fragonard, for instance, you will see the pre-drum by Fragonard in the École, but he was not a pupil of the École. He could compete for the prix and without being a pupil. You know, it's the rules in France are made so that you may avoid them. So generally, it is the way. Bon, the competitions to enter the École up to 1868 in painting and sculpture, different in architecture. It was only to draw after a model and to draw after the antique. It was nothing else, nearly nothing else. But you had to be presented by a teacher. If you were too bad, the teacher did not allow you to present. After 1864, it was a very long competition. very long, with many proofs like literature, history, anatomy, history of art, and so on. So it was difficult. After they were admitted, they could be very young, and they could try their chance up to 30, as I told. And they had many competitions, many other competitions to prepare the Grand Prix. In painting, so you would see many pieces for the competitions in the rooms here, in sketches and so on. All those competitions were supposed to prepare them to the Grand Prix, to the Prix de Rome.
And what about today? At what age do students enter the École today?
Honestly, I do not know. I do not know.
A little slightly older.
I was born in the 20th century, but I did not choose that. And I do not know exactly. I suppose there are rules. I am not sure they are respected. But certainly there is a limit, probably 27, but I am not sure. I think it's 27, yes.
One more question. No? Then please, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, we do.
Well, I know that Delacroix had a relationship with Chopin, but I was wondering whether there was any influence of the École on French grand opera. I'm thinking of Massenet and Meyerbeer, but particularly Berlioz and the Trojans. And the idea, when you mentioned that there was that the École believed in the grand story and the narrative and the moral idea, and whether this was a zeitgeist, something in the air, and whether that had any influence on French grand opera.
The answer is, I'm going to answer that one for Emmanuel. The answer is that this permeated French culture. It's to be found in music, in art, in literature, reflections in literature and the like. This reverence for things Greek in particular. And you have to understand that through the better part of the history of the École, certainly well into the period, well into the 19th century, the distinction that we now very clearly draw between Roman copies of Greek originals and Greek originals was not so distinct. They looked on these Roman copies as Greek works. Such was the power of the democracy and culture of Greece.
But you know, when the marbles of Lord Elgin were known, it was a revolution in England. Yeah. In France, they were completely, they were amazed, they were astonished. They were not able to understand that the true Greek democratic sculpture, it was the Phidias sculptures. So they went on copying Greek, Hellenistic models with, Venus Callipyge, they were not able to understand that. Most of them. In France, it was something which could not be accepted. But in a way, it was the same in all the other countries. The perfection of Phidias, it was so extraordinary. It was so brilliant that you cannot find nowhere something which is worth, being compared to Phidias. It's the same in England. It's grotesque, the Alma Tadema, Pericles on the Parthenon, debating with Pericles and so on. It was ridiculous. So it was very difficult to go on after this discovery. So the architects could because the architects could go to Athens, even to Asia. And French architecture was extraordinarily brilliant in these times. When you visit Paris, if it is certainly one of the most beautiful towns in the world, it is because of that. When you go to Germany, the influence of Greek architecture, it means that they took the German architects took the Parthenon and made twice bigger. It's true, it's a Valhalla. It's not exactly what I call the understanding Greece.
The one thing that might have gotten lost in all that, it was the appearance of the Elgin marbles, the Parthenon marbles at the British Museum that really changed attitudes and really made people understand that they had not been looking at authentic Greek works before. We had one more question.
You say Lord Elgin died in Paris, close to the École, as an exile because of Byron, you know.
One more. Here we go.
May I ask a question about your very fine lecture? It has to do with your interpretation of the way you say French culture interprets that scene where Hephaestus has captured the two lovers, Aphrodite and her brother Ares, with the net. All the gods stand around laughing. You emphasized the comic possibilities there, and there sure are comic possibilities in the text, but isn't that comedy with a very dark, menacing, frightening possibility? Because Ares is this completely out of control, reckless, aggressive killer who sides with both armies in the Trojan War and leads them both on to reckless, brutal, inhumane slaughter. The fact that he and Aphrodite are not only trapped here, but continually in mythology are lovers or brother and sister, doesn't this indicate that under the laughter and the comedy of it, there's a really very dark, menacing possibility always?
I don't understand the last word. Medicine? What do you say?
Menacing.
Menacing. Menacing.
Menacing. Creating fear.
Fear, yes, I understand. Anyway, it's true. Homer, it's not Homer, it is the Rhapsody in Phaeacia. And of course, it is a good joke. Of course, it could have a symbolical signification, Ares, god of war, and so on. But the most tragic, it is that Hephaestus is certainly the most intelligent of the gods. And of course, the most intelligent of the gods is very ugly and is a cuckold. This is the most tragic. About the allegorical signification, it could be, but I'm not sure that it's what you mean. Was that or?
It was really a question about the tragedy underlying comedy.
Yes, but it's true. I could have. There's a famous text in France, you know, tragedy or comedy. Tragedy, it means among the powerful, the kings, the gods. It's the same story with cuckolds and mistresses among the poor people. It's a question of difference of social level. This is the only difference. And what Homer, in the age of iron, was able to understand that, it's prodigious. It's prodigious as the scene where the captives, the slaves, scream, and Homer says, of course, they don't scream about Patroclus, they scream about themselves. It was 30 centuries ago, in a time where, the same for the scene with Hector and Andromache. I am not sure in this time conjugal love was so. In Homer, in Greek art, in Greek, that's why Greek thought finally conquered the world. The Greeks were able to understand everything and the contrary of everything. They had a critical sense for everything. You know, I can give you examples very far from that, but for instance, a Greek geographer had calculated that, after all, because, of course, the Earth is round, you could, circle, what do you say, sphere, you could go to India by going westward. And another Greek geograph, you say geograph, answered, which is stupid. In so long a way, you will fall on an unknown land, and you will lose your time. They were able to preview any answer to everything. So in anything, you can have something and another interpretation. Of course, my interpretations are only interpretations, but I think, after all, those who believe that classical art is only boring and serious, they are wrong. It is because they have not read Greek literature. In Greek literature, Plato is a philosopher and he is an ironist. Homer the same, and so on.
Michelle, Emmanuel, thank you very much for this afternoon, and most especially, thank you for sending this wonderful exhibition to Portland.